Dented press conference that took place some time ago. Kapil Sibal and other members of the opposition held a press conference talking about the fact, or announcing the fact that on behalf of 7 political parties in the Rajya Sabha, they have signed the motion, moved a motion for the impeachment, for the removal of the Honourable Chief Justice of India of the Supreme Court. They've sought the removal under Article 217, read with Article 124 of the Constitution. Now, 124 allows for members of Parliament to move a motion to remove a sitting judge from his current position. Now, remember, this has never ever happened with regard to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is the senior most judge in the country. Now, this motion has been submitted to the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha, who is the Vice President of India. They have the required number of people to entertain the motion. They need a minimum of 50. They've got 71. The motion has been signed by 71 members of Parliament. There are also 7 signatures of members who've retired from the Rajya Sabha, although those retired members technically wouldn't be, their signatures wouldn't be counted. Like Aarti was telling us some time ago before we went into break, now the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha will deliberate and decide whether or not to accept that letter. Aarti is still with us. Aarti, we were going over, of course, the charges. There are 5 charges that have been brought against the Chief Justice of India. There's also an abuse of the exercise of power in choosing to send sensitive matters to particular benches, misusing his authority in an attempt to influence the outcome. And this is perhaps the most serious of all of these charges, because influencing the constitution of benches is also what the 4 judges held a press conference about back in January. This is perhaps one of the main reasons that that there's been a lot of talk about impeachment so far.
Well, if you could just boil down the charges to two primary charges, really. The first one would be his conduct related to the Prasad Education Trust case, in which he was accused of not recusing himself in a case which he had heard earlier, and there were questions raised over his conduct in that particular hearing. The second real main charge
forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Geeta Luthra is on the phone line with us. Geeta Luthra is a very senior counsel joining us on the phone line. Ms. Luthra, thank you so much for giving us your time on this very important worrying afternoon in our country. We've never had this happen before. What is your reaction right now to what you're hearing?
So I think if indeed the motion goes through, because there are more than 50 members of the Rajya Sabha or the legislature that have in fact moved this impeachment motion, then the Speaker will on this basis institute an inquiry in terms of the Judges Inquiry Act. I think it's 1968, and he will then constitute a committee of three eminent members of the committee. Now, one will be a sitting Supreme Court judge, one will be a Chief Justice of a High Court, and one will be an eminent jurist. And the committee will then look into it, and the matter will be kept pending, awaiting the report of the committee. And depending on the report of the committee, then the matter goes on further from there. So legally speaking, this is how the matter will pan out. With regard to the merits, I don't think it would be fair for anyone to comment. It's a very, very serious and a very, may I say, trying period in our country, because this has never happened. But still, if this is how the law is, then this is how it will pan out.
Ms. Luthra, just yesterday we had the Supreme Court make an observation that it is very unfortunate the manner in which statements are being made about impeachment of members of the judiciary in this public manner. Do you believe that the amount of chatter that and there's not much else to, there's no other word to describe it, over the last couple of months in social media and otherwise, sometimes by lawmakers as well, you're using the word impeachment so casually, is that also out of the ordinary?
Yes, I think that's very out of the ordinary. Impeachment is something which has to be done in a very responsible manner. It is, as I said, it's a trying period in our history as far as the judiciary is concerned. But if so be it, then the Judges Inquiry Act mandates that this is the way impeachment's done. I'm, of course, one person who feels that social media also needs to have a very responsible outlook. And therefore, and this has become a very trying period in the U.S., where they have for the last few years, say about 10, 15 years, seeing the role social media has been playing in the dispensation of justice, and which is why they have been trying to put a block on matters which are sub judice and which are under trial. This was never the case because the U.S. always believed that freedom of speech should not be curbed. But with certain judgments, there were criminal law judgments, they thought that there was an element of interference in the decision-making, and that's why they have come down strongly. Indian courts have come down. In fact, there's a judgment by perhaps Justice Nariman and Justice Lokar in PUCL versus State of Maharashtra. There are several other judgments. There was a judgment in Nirbhay about India's daughter and the casting or the exhibition of the film India's Daughter while the matter was sub judice. So this role of social media is in fact being decried by the courts insofar as it's interfering with the dispensation of justice. So I think somewhere social media, of course, has to become very responsible, and the word impeachment is something which is the last word in case there is actually an apprehension that justice is not being dispensed and that there is misconduct by a judge. But having said that, the process, the legal process and the law as Parliament has laid down has to take its course.
Ms. Luthra, this, of course, all of this conversation began at the time that the four judges of the Supreme Court, senior judges of the Supreme Court, decided to hold a press conference on the 12th of January earlier this year. And since then, for ordinary citizens at least, there has been a grey question about the Supreme Court. Do you think that this impeachment, this unprecedented impeachment motion, will add to that sort of uncertainty about the Supreme Court, something that we really can't afford in a democracy like ours?
Unprecedented matters, to some extent, in fact, show that people are standing up for what they feel is right. I don't think that should make us nervous. But, of course, that should not make us nervous, because if that's the law and that's the way to correct something if they feel it's going wrong, but I don't think we should go for an impeachment motion at the drop of a hat. After all, in so many years, I think there have been perhaps 3 impeachment motions or 4. I'm not sure of the number, but to my mind, there have been some 3 or 4 since 1950. So just look at the history, and therefore history shows that it's not being done irresponsibly. I only hope that those who are doing it with a sense of responsibility. And I'm not commenting with regard to the 4 judges and what press conference they gave and whether that's unprecedented. Of course it's unprecedented. But in fact, a system of self-correction should actually enhance the confidence of the people in the judiciary, not reduce it.
And Ms. Luthra, you did say, of course, that there is a process now that will take place. In your opinion, how long would this process, how long would it take for this to actually play out? Because in the meantime, life has to go on. The Supreme Court has to continue to function as normal. While the Speaker, will examine the letter, decide whether or not he wants to accept it, call the inquiry, like you said, set up a committee, wait for the report of the committee. How long do you think this entire process would normally take?
I'm not certain about the duration of the committees in the past, but I feel that it should be about 3 months or so. That's how long the process normally takes, if I'm not mistaken. But I think I'm not the best person to comment on it.
All right, Ms. Luthra, many thanks for giving us your time. I really appreciate it and have great respect for your opinion at this point. Geeta Luthra, the senior counsel advocate with the Supreme Court, joining us on that phone line. Let's go across to some reactions that are coming in, or on the wires at this point. Let's listen in.
So we have moved a motion for impeachment for the removal of Chief Justice of India under 5 listed grounds of misbehavior. So we have submitted a motion signed by 71 members of the Parliament, but we have also given him in writing that there are 7 signatures of honorable members who are meanwhile retired. So we have said in the letter that those 7 members should not be counted out of the 71 members. So I am sure that the minimum requirement, more than the minimum requirement.
Well, we have Marshal Memon on the phone line right now. We'll come back to those reactions at this point. Mr. Memon, thank you for joining us. What is your reaction to the press conference that we've had this morning of a motion being moved to impeach the Honourable Chief Justice of India's Supreme Court?
See, this move of seeking impeachment of the highest judicial officer, namely the Chief Justice of India's Supreme Court, is not only unprecedented in the constitutional history of India, independent India, but is also an extremely unpleasant step. Definitely, if it has been moved, it must have been moved as a last resort when everything else failed. What has been witnessed in the Supreme Court for the whole of 2018 since beginning, we saw that on the 12th of January, those 4 judges came out and held a press conference, which itself was unprecedented.
Yes.
And 7-page letter was made public in which the first paragraph itself was very agonizing, very anguishing. And after that, what we thought as officers of the court, apart from being the lawmaker myself, I would say that I thought that Chief Justice would immediately sit with those 4 colleagues who were next to him immediately in the order of seniority and would sort out the whole thing to their satisfaction. Nothing of that kind happened. And not only that, a month later, in February, precisely on the 23rd of February, a Friday, when an outgoing judge, Justice Amit Roy, was addressing the colleagues of his at the farewell function, he used certain words and couple of sentences which I would reproduce. I would quote him. He said that, my colleagues, we have been working with a fractured face. You see how disturbing it is. And he further adds to say that extra legal elements are trying to take over this institution and it would be a sad day, we would become extinct. No, this is too much. When a judge, outgoing judge, makes these expressions in addition to those 4 judges, he is another judge, then still Chief Justice is unmoved. Merrily he keeps on going in the same manner for the last 4 months now. So therefore, impeachment is the last step that had to be taken. There is a lot of consideration, lot of deliberation, and then signatures are obtained by Congress. More than requisite number signatures are there. There should be no politics in this. We are concerned not about Deepak Mishra or Charmeshwar as individuals. We are concerned with the high esteem and reputation of institution called Supreme Court of India, which is at the apex.
Mr. Evan, would you expect now that anyone moving forward now would be extremely cautious, because it's not just this one esteemed, eminent individual in question, but our entire judicial system that...
I must tell you, I must add a couple of things.
Yes,
Number
please.
one is that, you see, in the second part of the budget session, I gave 6 notices, 6 times, once, twice, thrice. But unfortunately, the Parliament did not function at all. I gave notices after notices every second, third day during those 4 weeks, in which I have shown my concern about addressing the crisis in Supreme Court. But unfortunately, I could not get 1 minute to speak, and therefore everything was washed away with the session. And therefore, it is not that we are sitting quiet and we are not worried about what is happening. I am an officer of the court. I have practiced law for 45 long years, my whole career, and I have practiced in almost all the courts of the country and even outside country. I am very much concerned about the reputation, and I don't want the courts should be scandalized or politicized. But I think this was the last resort that had to be, course to be adopted.
Mr. Memon, you said you moved, notices within Parliament about the crisis. According to you, I'm quoting you, the crisis in the Supreme Court. What, according to you, is the crisis right now?
I was quoting the statement of Justice Apurva Roy on 22nd of February. What does he mean when he says so? I was also quoting the Justice Chalmeshwar and 3 of his colleagues, what they mentioned in 7-page letter, which is heart-rending. How can Supreme Court work even for an hour after such accusations? It should have been immediately set right. On Friday, the 12th January, when those 4 judges outspoke, you see, in the Lawn, which is unprecedented in the history of Indian courts, nothing happens thereafter, and everybody is saying, ignore it, continue merrily in the same fashion. This is disgusting.
Mr. Memon, obviously all of this began initially with the press conference that was held by those 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court. Do you think, again, that was a last resort as well?
Naturally, it has not been resolved. Unfortunately, nobody bothered. It has remained like that only, and then a month later, or even 6 weeks later, as I gave you the date, on the 23rd of February, a Friday, again, one of the outgoing judges says that we are working with fractured. So,
Mr. Memon? Well, there seems to be a bad phone line there. Unfortunately, call drops in Delhi is something that we're all plagued with and we all have to worry about. We're going to go across and bring you some of the reactions coming in from members of Parliament, from other members of the political community. Remember, there are 2 sides to this. On one hand, the entire judicial fraternity or the legal fraternity is a little distressed by how this has happened. We had the Supreme Court in a judgment mention the fact that they believe that the sort of loose comments being made in public about impeachment were in fact irresponsible and unfortunate, and now we have the opposition, 71 members of the opposition in Rajya Sabha, move a motion to impeach the highest office of judiciary in our country. Listen to these reactions.
The first charge relates to the conspiracy to pay illegal gratifications by persons in relation to the Prasad Education Trust case and the manner in which the case was dealt with by the Chief Justice. It is on record that the CBI registered an FIR. There are several recorded conversations between middlemen, including a retired judge of the Orissa High Court, excerpts of transcripts of which are set out in the articles of charge. The second charge relates to the Chief Justice having dealt on the administrative as well as the judicial side with a writ petition which sought an investigation into the matter of Prasad Education Trust, in which he too was likely to fall within the scope of investigation. On November 9, 2017, when a writ petition was mentioned before Justice Chalmeshwar at 10:30 a.m., since the Chief Justice was sitting in a constitution bench, the same was directed to be listed later the same day. When the matter was taken up, a note dated November 6, 2017 was placed before the judges hearing the matter by an official of the registry. This is the basis of the third charge, alleging that the note of 6th November brought to the attention of Justice Chalmeshwar on 9th November, as the matter was taken up, was antedated. The charge of antedating is by all accounts very serious. The fourth charge relates to the Chief Justice having acquired land when he was an advocate by giving an affidavit which was found to be false. The fifth charge relates to the abuse of exercise of power by the Chief Justice in choosing to send sensitive matters to particular benches by misusing his authority.
उम्मीद है कि संविधान के मुताबिक चेयरमैन इसके ऊपर फैसला करेंगे।
5 पॉइंट्स जो है वो उसमें लिखे हुए हैं एंड वी आर सीरियस।
आपकी पार्टी ने समर्थन
जी वी हैव।
Well, I'm going to go across to Aarti as well, who's standing by in our newsroom. Aarti, we just had Kapil Sibal read out those charges as well, very serious charges. And like Geeta Luthra was telling us on the phone line, you know, it will be up to the Speaker right now to call an inquiry of 3 eminent members, perhaps High Court, Supreme Court, and 1 eminent jurist, and then we'll have to wait for the report of the committee. But I think that given already the reactions we're seeing on social media, given the reactions we're seeing among you know, the traditional or the formal media at this point, there is also some damage that is being done to the general you know, idea of the fact that our Supreme Court is beyond question. If we just go over the process one more time for our viewers, Aarti, of what the process of impeachment is and how often this has happened before in the past. So this is the first step, like you said. Take us through the rest of it.
Yes, this is the first step that will just set the ball rolling. Remember, just because we have more than 50 signatures does not mean that the CJI is impeached. This is the first step that sets the ball rolling. After these signatures have been submitted to the chairman, he deliberates whether or not prima facie there is a case here. Once he finds that it merits a probe, he sets up a committee which includes the which includes an eminent judge of the Supreme Court, of the High Court, and another eminent jurist. This committee then deliberates upon the charges, and if and only if they find that there is some merit or there is this particular case warrants further probe, then they pass their probe.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, Aarti, because we have Prashant Bhushan join us right now live from New Delhi. Mr. Bhushan, thank you very much for joining us. It's a senior lawyer as well with the Supreme Court. Mr. Bhushan was among one of the petitioners who sought an independent probe in the Justice Lawyer case as well. And from what I understand, you called the verdict extremely disappointing and a black day. I want to understand from you, Mr. Bhushan, your reaction to this impeachment motion that has been moved this morning.
Well, I think there was no option for the polity of this country except to move this impeachment motion, because every other method had been tried, including we had submitted a complaint under the in-house procedure, which could not obviously have been submitted against the Chief Justice to the Chief Justice himself. So it was submitted to the next 5 judges. That also did not elicit any reaction, because the in-house procedure does not explicitly mention what happens when the complaint is against the Chief Justice himself. Now this impeachment motion...
Well, we seem to have lost that audio of Prashant Bhushan. We're going to try and get it back again. But what Mr. Bhushan was telling us, and this was really important, was that he personally believes that there perhaps this was a last resort and there was no other choice. I want to remind our viewers that Prashant Bhushan was among the petitioners who had sought an independent probe in the Justice Lawyer case, the case that the Supreme Court dismissed all petitions seeking an SIT probe into the case of the special CBI judge, Justice B.H. Lawyer. Mr. Bhushan had called this a black day in the Supreme Court history, and you know, and he also said it was extremely disappointing, the verdict that had come out, the judgment that had come out in that case, not to investigate the case. I understand we have the audio back again. Mr. Bhushan, I apologize for that bad connection. Please continue. So you were telling us how you believe that this was perhaps the last resort.
Yes, you see, there are 5 serious charges against the Chief Justice. First, that he apparently entered into some agreement to obtain bribes in the medical college case, of which the CBI has collected adequate evidence, but is for some reason is just sitting on that evidence. Second, that he backdated a memo which was sent hurriedly to court number 2 in order to prevent court number 2 from fixing a bench in this medical college case, which sought an independent investigation. Third, that he abused his judicial and administrative power in order to hear and decide cases involving himself, which means this medical college case. Fourth, that he gave a false affidavit to obtain land for himself from the Odisha government when he was a lawyer. And lastly, that he abused his power as master of the roster in fixing politically sensitive cases before inappropriate benches, which is a charge which was also made by 4 senior judges in their press conference.
Mr. Bhushan,
so therefore, yes, in the light of such serious charges...
Yes, do you believe any of this was in reaction to the...
In the light of such serious charges...
Please go ahead, I apologize. Please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Do you believe...
Go ahead.
Do you believe any of this was in reaction to the Justice Loya matter that was dismissed yesterday?
No, I don't think it had anything to do with the Judge Loya matter, because the Judge Loya matter decision came suddenly yesterday, and the impeachment process and the signatures, etc., had been going on at least for the last 3 weeks. And they had sought time, the political parties had sought time from the Vice President a week ago, but he was outside the town, and therefore appointment was given today. Otherwise, the signatures had been obtained on that impeachment motion much earlier.
Mr. Bhushan, I want to draw your attention to the fact, and you said yourself that this has never happened before. In fact, the rules don't even clearly mention how this should proceed when the person in question is the Honourable Chief Justice of India. What do you think is going to happen next? We know what the procedure is, but how long do you think it will take, given the fact that this is such a grave and serious matter?
You see, the Vice President now needs to appoint an inquiry committee of 3 judges in consultation with the number 2 judge of the Supreme Court, because obviously he can't consult the Chief Justice on an impeachment motion against himself. So therefore he needs to consult judge number 2 in order to appoint an inquiry committee of 1 sitting Supreme Court judge, 1 sitting Chief Justice of a High Court, and 1 eminent jurist. After that, the committee starts inquiring. I believe the CBI already has all the evidence that is required for charge number 1. Charge number 2 is a very simple charge. It doesn't require much inquiry as to whether the Chief Justice committed misconduct by dealing with a case involving himself when he was told to recuse himself from the matter. Charge number 3 is also a very simple matter whose inquiry can be done very quickly about the backdating of the memo. Charge number 4, again, all the documentary evidence, I believe, has been annexed to the impeachment motion regarding charge number 4, regarding his false affidavit for obtaining the land. And charge number 5 is about his listing of cases. None of these should take much time. If an inquiry committee is serious about the matter, they should be able to complete that process within 1 month at the outside. And thereafter the report is submitted and then the matter goes for voting in both houses of parliament.
Mr. Bhushan, we also had the Supreme Court observe that it felt that the talk about impeachment by lawmakers openly and in public was unfortunate, and they didn't believe that it should have been done in that manner. Do you agree?
No, certainly not. You see, no impeachment can be a secret process. How can you get a impeachment motion signed by 100 MPs of the Lok Sabha or 50 MPs of the Raj Sabha by keeping it secret? It is not possible. This is something which is bound to go out in the open, which is bound to be talked about, which is bound to be discussed. The MPs also need to discuss it amongst themselves before they sign and file the impeachment motion, etc. And any talk
Right, we're losing that line, but we're going to keep coming back to Mr. Bhushan and try and get that fixed as quickly as possible. Remember his reaction to the fact that there has been sort of talk in the open about impeachment was he said that it's impossible to get 71 MPs or 100 MPs, members of parliament, to sign such a serious impeachment motion against the Chief Justice of India without them having to discuss the matter. And it's possibly that discussion that has surfaced in the public domain. Mr. Bhushan also making it very clear that he believed that, in this particular case, the vice president or the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha would have to consult with the number 2 judge of the Supreme Court, because normal precedent would be to consult with the Chief Justice himself, but in this particular case that would not be possible. Aryama Sundaram joins us on the phone line as well. Mr. Sundaram, I appreciate your time in this very worrying period for our judiciary. What is your reaction to the motion for impeachment that we've heard this afternoon?
Well, I think all I can say is it saddens me greatly. It really saddens me because the judiciary has always been held in such high regard and has time and again lived up to the expectations and even surpassed it. I think every common man knows that there is justice in this country, that we do have the judiciary we can always turn to. So any kind of affront against the judiciary is most unfair and unfortunate. I won't say unfair, because that's something which these members of parliament would decide for themselves, but I think it is most unfortunate. And I can say that what I don't like at all in this whole matter is that, having presented a motion of impeachment and to the vice president, well, for whatever reasons they felt called for it, to thereafter for certain people to rush to the media, to get onto a press conference, to go on for, I don't know, half an hour and more, making one accusation after another. I thought that was most uncalled for and seemed to me to be nothing but an attempt to get some political mileage, which makes me worry whether the entire impeachment process, which was discussed amongst various opposition parties, could have been motivated by political considerations and not otherwise, which makes me, and the manner in which these various press conferences come out, makes me worried as an Indian citizen as to whether such a move is really going to weaken the judiciary, whether it's going to make the judiciary feel, look, you better do exactly what all of us in parliamentarians, legislature wants, otherwise if you don't do so, we're afraid that some of us can always move an impeachment motion against you. And according to me, that hits at the very foundation of the separation of powers. It hits at the very independence of the judiciary. And I must say that given the conduct of this press conference, which I have seen, I am exceedingly worried and very unhappy.
Mr. Sundaram, obviously the entire process as it will play out will take time, but do you believe just the impeachment motion and the press conference, like you just mentioned, would already cause a significant amount of distress, not just to the entire legal community, but members of the judiciary right now, and perhaps doubts in the minds of ordinary citizens as to the credibility of our legal system?
Certainly, yes. Certainly, yes. And according to me, any person who is holding office as a public servant, who believes that as a public servant, as a member of parliament or otherwise, he has an obligation to the people, he has an obligation to the constitution, he has an obligation to keep the faith of the people in the various institutions and not attack and make any kind of statements or attacks which are going to undermine that confidence, and especially in an institution which has been held in the highest regard and for very good reason by the people in this country. People have always said, the man on the street would say, even if he has a fight with his neighbor, he'll say, I'll take you to court, because that is the faith people have. Now, according to me, I think a great deal of responsibility is expected from people who are representatives of the people when they come out on public television and make accusations and read out in detail various charges according to them, explaining what those charges are, etc. I believe that surely they would be aware that it's going to really erode at a person's faith in the judiciary. And if for political compulsions, their political compulsions override this concern, well, I don't know where democracy is going in this country.
Well, Mr. Sundaram, also after the four senior judges had their press conference earlier this year, there was sort of a rift within the entire legal community as well, where people began to take sides. Again, something that we perhaps have not seen happen in our country. Is that also distressing for you, that within the Supreme Court, within the officers of the court, there's a rift right now, taking sides with one or the other, which by itself is distressing?
I do not know where you've got this issue of taking sides with the one and the other is concerned. I have two things to tell you on this.
Yes, please.
Number one, four very senior, respected judges of the Supreme Court voiced certain concerns about the administration of the court. Now, they did so. And I believe it is something which was to be worked in and is being worked in within the judiciary itself. On the one hand, the courts have always insisted on transparency of the working of every limb of government. What was done in that conference was to make transparent that there are administrative problems, which administrative problems ought to be addressed. And I believe that it's an internal matter which is duly being addressed, or which should be duly addressed. It wasn't anything more than that. Again, if you say that there are lawyers within the institution who are taking sides or having discussions on it, again, it's an internal matter of one wing of the government trying to do its very best to make itself function at the optimum. Now, I think that is laudable. If the judiciary is willing to see within itself that, look, there are some faults which we need to cure, and then say we are going to go about to cure it, I think that's laudable, that an institution should see that and try to make itself more wholesome and a better functioning limb of government. Now, that is an internal matter. It's not something to make political capital out of.
Yes.
The very fact that the judiciary itself felt there are things for us to address means that the judiciary is aware that they have certain administrative hitches which need to be addressed. And one should appreciate the fact that the judiciary doesn't sit and say, oh, we are above everything, but recognizes that, okay, if we have faults, we should also cure our faults. Now, that's a matter within the judiciary which is being addressed, and four judges talking about it showed that the judiciary was keen to redress and to take action on such administrative issues. And it should be left there. But what did happen was, parties tried to make political capital out of it. And once again, I think at the altar of political furtherance, we are forgetting much of what we should subserve in a democracy.
Right. Mr. Sundaram, like you said, you believed that those problems were being handled internally by the judiciary and they were being looked at in due process. But charge number 5 that has been brought forward by the members of the opposition who've moved this impeachment motion relates to the abuse of the exercise of power in choosing to send certain sensitive matters to particular benches, misusing authority in an attempt to influence the outcome. Do you believe then that this charge was unnecessary if the matters were being looked at internally?
Look, if you're asking me objectively as a lawyer on something which has now been published in the public domain by this long and detailed press conference which was given, I will say one thing. By making a charge like that, I mean, who are you attacking? You are attacking because of your attack against one person. You're saying it was sent to select benches, so you've attacked people of that bench. Thereafter, you are attacking the fact that certain judgments are given, and judgments are given by benches of not less than 2, and some of the judgments are by 3 judges. So you're attacking the other 2 judges on the bench. You know, it's never ending when you start attacking judgments. It's never ending when you start attacking decisions on cases. You know, at that stage, I think people must stop and say, look, while we can always disagree with a judgment, we don't attack it for motives. And that is never done. You know, if you have had any clue what went on in the court when this Judge Loya's case was being argued, the kind of behavior in court, the complete fall of any form of legal decency as we know in the courts when arguing cases, I mean, it was heartrending for many lawyers who've been in this profession for many years. I never imagined I'd see conduct of proceedings in that manner. I never thought I would see the maligning which I saw in that manner. I never thought that cases could be argued in that manner. For me, it was an eye-opener, and let me tell you, it's not an eye-opener I ever wanted to open my eyes to.
Mr. Sundaram, also in that same on that same line of thought, the Supreme Court made an observation saying that the public conversation that lawmakers have been having about impeachment of members of the judiciary was unfortunate. But we had Mr. Prashant Bhushan speak to us on this channel a few minutes ago when he said that it's impossible to get other members of parliament to sign a motion without discussing it, and that discussion is necessary. It can't be done without discussion. Do you believe that those comments were also unfortunate, like the Supreme Court mentioned, or...
Well, all I can say is comments among the parliamentarians, amongst themselves, to discuss whether to bring a motion or not is, of course, their prerogative. But I cannot understand if Mr. Bhushan felt that such comments should be made on national television, calling for press interviews and making all these comments in the way they have just been done. I don't know whether that is discussion amongst others to get on board, or whether it was politicizing and nothing short of that.
Not long ago, we saw a no-confidence motion being moved in Parliament as well. This sort of disruption, and I want you, if you would, please, to speak to Indian citizens directly right now. We're used to seeing this sort of disruption within Parliament because it's political. We've never, ever had anything of this sort happen within our judiciary. And it's concerning, and I'm sure people are worried, they're confused, they don't know what this actually means. How would you want citizens to take this information?
Well, all I would like to think is that the amount of money which I give to the government every year, which goes towards paying parliamentarians in order to legislate, if much of that time is being spent by disrupting the House of Parliament, well, that is once again something which makes me worry about where democracy is going in our country. Because don't forget that every single parliamentarian who's sitting there owes his existence to my money, to your money, to our money, our taxpayers' money. And if they cannot show the respect to us that we show them, then I think they are not showing respect to democracy in the first place.
Right, and like I said, there will be, of course, a question in people's minds at this point when they hear these 5 charges that have been publicly announced on the credibility of our Supreme Court. Would you say that it is fair at this point for all Indian citizens to wait until the matter moves further in any way? Because this is just no more than an allegation?
Absolutely. In fact, being an allegation which has its own process to be followed, I think before following that process, at the very stage when it's in its, at the very budding stage, to go and make public all this in the way of a national media and talk about it in this way, it's almost like advertising to the whole world, look, A, B, C, D, E, and according to us, this is true. Look, if this is so, there is a manner. You presented an impeachment motion. Then the impeachment motion will take its course in accordance with law. But by coming out and talking about it in great detail, not even saying, look, we moved an impeachment motion on various charges and leaving it there, instead of doing that, to go into each one in great detail, explaining everything, and don't forget that what is the judiciary to do? How do they answer this? Do they come on media now and defend themselves and say, look, this to charge 1, I say this, charge 2, I say this? That will never be done. It cannot be done. It would not be done. And I believe at this stage to do so is to give one side of a story to the people, and thereby it really undermines on the very confidence in the judiciary. And I don't think that kind of action was called for at all. And at the very least, I believe that that kind of action is not in furtherance of democracy, but is actually retrograde to democracy.
So you do believe that this motion could have been moved, if necessary, without any sort of press announcement of the same?
They could have definitely made a press announcement and said, we have moved for the impeachment or whatever else. They could have left it there, not gone into graphic detail, gone into line by line, read out everything, then explained it, and did everything else. It was almost like you were arguing a brief.
And the social media fallout, Mr. Sundaram, unfortunately, we do live in the era of Facebook and Twitter, and there will be ordinary citizens discussing these 5 charges at this point.
Obviously, and I'm sure the people who gave this press conference are well aware of it. I'm sure they're well aware of it. And it saddens me that if they feel that's a step in aid of faith of the people in the judiciary, which is something which is so important. And don't forget, we're talking about a judiciary which time and time again has lived up to the will of the people, has lived up to the hopes of the people. And I think it's a very sad day, FAYE. There's really very little more I can say on this.
Mr. Sundaram, one last question. I apologize. One last question. We do, of course, know that the Honorable Chief Justice Mishra is due to retire in a few months. Given the level of process that needs to be followed in this particular, motion, do you believe that this was politically motivated? Is this motion something that will actually carry out even before his retirement?
Look, one can only talk about public perception or an individual's perception. You can't talk about, I can't read motives into something. But just the sequence of events from time and again would drive me as a citizen to an inference that it could be for political gain and nothing else. It could drive me to and I have the opportunity to comment on it because these people have made it so public. They brought it into the public forum. Otherwise, one would never have commented on what happens within legislature or what happens when parliamentarians act as parliamentarians in that manner. But since they brought it into the public forum, well, I can say that from time and time again, the comments which have been made on the public forum seem to indicate to me, as a citizen, a perception that there's a lot of political game playing which is going on in the hope that this could be a political gain for some certain people.
All right, Mr. Sundaram, many thanks for your time. I really appreciate you giving time to Mirror Now at what is, like you mentioned, a very distressing afternoon for the Indian judiciary and for the Indian public. Remember, we're talking about the Supreme Court of India. We're talking about the Chief Justice of that Supreme Court. So this is the highest office one can occupy within the judiciary of our country. Now, 71 members, of which 7 retired, of Parliament have signed an impeachment motion against the Chief Justice, the Honourable Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India. And we're getting a lot of reactions that are coming in on that, but we'll play some of that reactions for you before we take a quick break here on Mirror Now. We'll come back with senior voices of the judiciary to help us understand what this means, because this has never happened before. Take a look.
जो भी पार्टी का निर्णय होगा उस पर पार्टी एक अधिकृत रूप से उस निर्णय को आपके सामने रखते हुए और उसके जो भी कारण है, उसकी जो भी उसके आधार हैं, उस पर आपको स्पष्टीकरण अवश्य समय पर देगी। मैं नहीं मानता हूं कि ये संवेदनशील विषय है, इस पर हम आम चर्चा करें, बार-बार चर्चा करें और उस पर और प्रश्न चिन्ह हम उन स्थानों पर लगाएं जहां पे प्रश्न चिन्ह नहीं लगने चाहिए।
Initially, we had not signed the petition on the.
जैसी चॉइस सबकी मिलेगी चॉइस मकान या बिल्डिंग ऑफिस सबकी मिलेगी चॉइस 1 2 3 4 सारे BHK